Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories.
What do we know about Leonardo da Vinci?
The greatest genius.
This is not so Da Vinci is not a genius and at the same time a genius. But definitely not the genius you imagine him to be. Sounds confusing. I understand. A short example. At the end of the 15th century, Leonardo da Vinci wrote The Last Supper as one of his main works. Hundreds of years later, a coded message, secret images, and other secrets are found on the mural. Leonardo is not just a genius, but also a mystery. Inspired by this, Dan Brown writes the famous book The Da Vinci Code. Hollywood shoots a blockbuster based on it, and even Stis Mikhailov releases a song of the same name. Secrets, codes, messages, ciphers. In reality, The Last Supper begins to fall off the wall 20 years after it was written. The genius messed up with the paints. The composition that he came up with did not stick well to the surface. Mysterious secret messages on the mural are exclusively for conspiracy theorists. The book The Da Vinci Code is fiction, interesting, exciting, but fiction. Don't get me wrong, this doesn't detract from Da Vinci's merits. The Last Supper is definitely a masterpiece. The Song of Stis Mikhailov is definitely not. Today I'm going to tell you about the life of a gay outsider, an illegitimate craftsman without education, whom descendants will call one of the main geniuses in the history of mankind. This is a biography of an artist, engineer, scientist, producer, designer, and finally, a passionate lover of pink clothes.
Leonardo da Vinci is the greatest genius of the era. Leonardo da Vinci's legendary beard could have been nude.
An international scandal is already breaking out in the art world.
Leonardo da Vinci was sold for $450 million.
Experts say the painting could have been stolen.
Since the death of the great Renaissance master, Leonardo da Vinci.
Okay, let's start with an unexpected problem. Are you sure you know this Da Vinci self-portrait? Or this portrait, belonging to the brush of his pupil? Or this one, made many years after the artist's death? The image combines the age. And although much is unknown about Leonardo's life even today, one thing is for sure: Da Vinci was not born a 60-year-old man. He is not Benjamin Button. So what did the young Leonardo look like? Most likely, this is a sketch made for one statue, the author of which was Leonardo's teacher. He probably used his student as a model. The image matches the rare memories of those who knew the young Da Vinci. They described him as a handsome, athletic man with long curly hair. But the most interesting detail of these memories is Leonard's outfit, a pink knee-length tunic. And contemporaries were surprised rather not by the color, but by the length, because most preferred clothes to the floor. The habit of being in the style of Da Vinci will remain throughout his life, and clothes will be almost the main item of expenditure. Favorite colors are pink and red. At least, this follows from the records of purchases that are in the diaries of Da Vinci. By the way, 3/4 of the diaries are lost. But the part that has survived, and the memories of contemporaries, are enough to dispel myths and understand that Leonardo da Vinci was far from what it is customary to imagine him to be. For many children, being born out of wedlock would mean an unenviable prospect full of difficulties and suffering. For Leonardo, it was luck. Back in the early 14th century, his ancestors settled in the Italian city of Vinci. For more than 100 years, almost all the men of the dynasty were notaries, including 24-year-old Pierre. He meets a girl named Caterina. After a while, a boy is born, who is called Leonardo. This is 1452nd year. The boy had no chance of becoming anyone other than a notary, but Caterina was the orphaned daughter of a farmer. And Pierre was already making a successful career as a notary in Florence by that time. The marriage of people with such a different background at that time was unlikely. So Leonardo becomes illegitimate. For Italy in the middle of the 15th century, this did not make you a second-class person. But it often deprived you of privileges in the first place, of the opportunity to inherit a family business. In the case of Da Vinci, everyone benefited from this, both the family and the young offspring. Procrastination and a quick switch of attention would make Leonard a disgusting notary. 8 months after the birth of his son, Pierre da Vinci marries the daughter of a prominent Florentine shoe manufacturer. He will live a long life with several marriages and become a father 11 more times. Pierre will continue to communicate with Leonardo and theoretically will be able to officially recognize him as her son. But she will never do so. Leonardo's mother's Caterina are looking for a suitable husband among local farmers, and within a short time, they have 4 children of their own. Leonardo will mainly spend his early childhood in the town of Vinci, in the house of his grandfather. Okay, let's stop for a second. Do you know what the famous actor DiCaprio and the great artist Da Vinci have in common. Both of them are called Leonardo first. The mother of the future Hollywood star named her son after the famous artist, and secondly, a big-budget Hollywood film about the life of the great painter is in development, in which Leonardo DiCaprio will play the main role. But most importantly, the names of Da Vinci and DiCaprio have a common history of appearance. In the 15th–16th century in Italy, many began to register their place of birth as a surname. Thus, to the name of Pierre's father and Leonardo himself, the same Da Vinci was added. Leonardo was illegitimate, and therefore did not get into one of the prestigious schools where a full-fledged education was given instead. The boy received a short training in the basics of mathematics and otherwise engaged in self-education as a result. The future genius will have difficulty learning Latin and writing in adulthood on it with errors. But on the other hand, practice and experiments will become his main tools in understanding the world. At the age of 12, Leonardo leaves Vinci and moves to his own father in Florence. Florence of that time was a boiling epicenter of commerce, technology, and, most importantly, art. Constant holidays, fashionable people walk the streets, in short, big city life. Everything is run by the famous Medici, specifically Lorenzo de Medici. For a large number of artists, Lorenzo was a patron, or, more simply, a person who generously gave orders and money. There has never been a more ideal time and place in history to be born a bastard. Yes, you might not have had a good education, you might not have had an inheritance or a family profession. But what you definitely had was freedom. Freedom to do whatever you want with your life. At worst, even become an artist. Leonardo was also lucky to be born in the period of time that will be the dawn of the Renaissance. This is the time when the superstars of fine art, Michelangelo, Raphael, Donatello, and of course Leonardo da Vinci created. All these people whose names will be called Ninja Turtles. After moving to Florence, Leonardo da Vinci continues his superficial education, mostly the basics of mathematics. The student is distinguished by left-handedness. Not that it was something reprehensible, but it definitely set the boy apart from everyone else. This feature will manifest itself in the future in the drawing technique and an unusual approach to writing. Around the beginning of his 30s, Leonardo will begin to keep detailed diaries. He will mostly write about anatomy, engineering, physics, art, and very rarely about his personal life. The entries will be made upside down from right to left, that is, ideally, you need a mirror to read them. Very often this fact is perceived as an additional proof of the mystery of Da Vinci. Allegedly, he specifically encrypted everything so that no one could read it. And apparently, this is a myth. Let's start with the obvious. Why in the 15th century to encrypt their conclusions that the sun does not revolve around the earth? It is clear. Why encrypt information about apricots bought on the market and recently purchased stockings is not clear. Stockings are normal men's clothing of that time, do not be shy. Most likely, the real reason for the mirror technique is left-handedness. If you write with your left hand from left to right, there is a risk that the ink on the page will be smeared, either with your sleeve or with your palm, and the paper is expensive. Even when Leonardo was already secured, he filled every available space on the page with some information. The Italian book on calligraphy of the 15th century just gives a life hack for left-handers to make notes in the mirror technique. There are other left-handed contemporaries of Da Vinci who wrote in exactly the same way. And finally, if you think that such a mirror technique is available only to geniuses, try it. I assure you, it's not as difficult as it seems. The fact that Leonardo studied mathematics mainly in Florence could mean that his father Pierre hoped that his son would become a notary. However, by that point it's already pretty obvious. Leonardo da Vinci is much more interested in drawing than office work. There is a rather famous story about a painted wooden shield, which can be considered the first work of the future genius. It was like this. The carpenter apologizes and asks Father Leonard to take the wooden shield to Florence for painting. But Pyrrha entrusts this task to her son. He decides to draw either a fire-breathing dragon or a Gorgon Medusa. And for this, Leonardo, then still a boy, studies lizards, snakes, grasshoppers, and other real-life creatures. After receiving the finished work, Pyrrha da Vinci is pleasantly shocked by the abilities of his son. So much so that he keeps the shield for himself and buys a simpler replacement for the carpenter. It's not a fact that the whole story with the shield is true, perhaps it's just a legend, but one thing is known for certain. To study the real world in order to realize fantasies on the basis of this an approach that Leonardo will carry through his whole life. Perhaps because of Pierre's penchant for drawing, he will abandon the idea of legalizing his son and making him a notary. Instead, he will take the teenager to his familiar client, the famous artist Verrocchio. Today, Verrocchio is one of the important representatives of the Renaissance in the 15th century. He is essentially a craftsman, and his workshop is a conveyor. Under the supervision of the head, students and assistants stamp paintings with religious subjects. However, this place will in fact become a real school for many artists, including Botticelli and Leonardo da Vinci. Let's stop for a second to clarify an important detail. Painting is not art, at least for most people living in the 15th century. The logic was as follows. What is the product of the mind? Art. What is made by hands is a craft. Poetry, art. Sculpture, craft, music, art, painting. Well, you understand. The system was formed in ancient Greece, and for a long time, everyone was satisfied. Everything will change thanks to the Renaissance, including Leonardo da Vinci. Artists of that time, primarily from Italy, brought fine art to a new level. They studied anatomy, perspective, geometry, physics with one single goal, to transfer 3D reality to 2D canvas as reliably as possible. A simple example. On the left is a typical picture of a dash icon of the 14th century. On the right is one of the first famous works of Da Vinci. The difference is obvious whether you are an art critic or just a person with eyes. The picture on the right is the baptism of Christ. And to be precise, this is the work of Verrocchio, made with the participation of his student Leonardo da Vinci. By that time, the artist, who is in his early 20s, had spent almost 5 years in the studio. He is no longer just an intern, but a full-time employee living at the studio. This means that Leonardo can fulfill not only conveyor orders, but also be a partner of the master in his projects. This is what Da Vinci does, and so successfully that he surpasses the teacher. An example of the baptism of Christ. On the left, there are two angels that interest us the most, because one of them was painted by Da Vinci. And if you are watching this video on something bigger than the phone screen, then most likely you could guess intuitively. The angel on the left belongs to Leonardo. His pose is much more lively and natural, as if he is in motion and not a frozen statue. And if you believe the legend, the difference between the angels was so obvious to a contemporary that Verrocchio recognized himself as a defeated teacher and eventually abandoned the brush. Whether it was really so is unknown, but what is really a fact, Verrocchio, after the baptism of Christ, in fact, did not finish any independent work. At this point, Leonard's story might have resembled a typical ascent of talent to the top, if not for prison. A week before Da Vinci's 24th birthday, he is accused of sodomy. Allegedly, he and 3 other men were seen in an intimate relationship with a young man named Saltarelli. The charges are anonymous, but the investigation is beginning. Homosexual relations in Florence at that time, crimes, and every year several hundred people are sentenced to imprisonment, expulsion from the city, or even death. But Leonardo is lucky. Yes, he probably spends a day or 2 in prison, but it quickly turns out that the rest of the accused are connected with the Medici clan. The case is hushed up, the suspects are at large. Was Da Vinci guilty? Most likely. There is not a single mention that Leonardo ever had relationships with women, but with men on the contrary. They will be together with one of their partners for more than 20 years. Sodomy was a crime in 19th century Florence, but it was a common phenomenon among local artists. Botticelli was accused of sodomy. Michelangelo, Donatello, and Cellini were gay. Leonardo did not exactly flaunt his personal life, but in general, he did not hide his orientation. Problems with the law do not interfere with Leonardo's work at Verrocchio. He continues to study how nature works and how the human eye perceives it. From this, the famous unique style of Da Vinci's painting will be born. First of all, we are interested into Italian words chiaroscuro and sfumato. I explain it simply. We see the world as 3-dimensional, but the canvas is a 2-dimensional space. How to make a 3-dimensional human figure in the picture and separate it from the background. First of all, with the help of shadow and light. The kerosene lamp technique is responsible for this. Roughly speaking, you see an example of this technique right in my frame. That light, which is in the background, creates the illusion of 3-dimensionality on a 2D screen. That's why he's there. Today it is done by every second blogger who is worried about his image, and in the 15th century, this important achievement of painting was used not only by Da Vinci, but he mastered it masterfully. Another business card of a genius, the so-called fumato, or haze. Objects don't have clear contours, instead there are smooth transitions of shadow and light. Thanks to this, the people in the picture look alive and not frozen statues. Da Vinci will carry his signature fumata through the entire biography, starting with the angel at the baptism of Christ, and ending with Gioconda. Okay, I suspect some of you are now thinking, dude, you said at the beginning that Leonardo is not such a genius. But so far everything looks exactly like that. A teenager comes to the studio as an apprentice and quickly becomes a cool artist. This is so, by the middle of his 20s, Leonardo manages to catch a hype. His works are beginning to be noticed. However, this does not mean that everything that came out from under the young artist's hand was flawless. A vivid example of the Annunciation. The painting was painted while working with Verrocchio and has a clear imperfection. Unnatural hands of the Virgin Mary, a bulky pedestal, and a garden fence distracting attention from the plot, and so on. All of this means only one thing. If Da Vinci was a genius, then he became one, and much later, and was not born initially. At 24, Leonardo still works and lives in Verrocchio's studio, churning out religious paintings. By that time, many of the master's students had already become independent artists. Why Da Vinci finally decides to go free swimming is unknown. Perhaps this was caused by accusations of sodomy, which occurred a year before. Anyway, in 1477, Leonardo opens his own workshop in Florence from a business point of view. It will be a disaster. In 5 years of the workshop's existence, Leonardo will receive only 3 orders. 2 of them he will never finish, the third he will not even start. There is a kind of top, unfinished masterpieces in the history of art, and Leonardo's painting The Adoration of the Magi has every right to top this list. Da Vinci receives this order from the monastery thanks to the connections of his father Pierre. The Adoration of the Magi is a well-known biblical story. Many great artists have taken it for their works. By the time he received the order, Da Vinci was already notorious as an undisciplined artist. Promises were broken, deadlines were broken, so Leonardo was forced to sign a very strict contract. After that, Da Vinci imprints the perfectionism pedal on the floor. He makes a detailed sketch and calculates the perspective, thinks over the background. In his opinion, not a single pose of the character in the picture should be repeated, and there are dozens of people there. Each of the characters experiences an emotion that should be expressed in his movement, hand position, and facial expressions. And Da Vinci first draws everyone naked. He believes in an anatomical approach, when at the first stage the body is drawn. And clothes are on top of it. Where can I get all this information? Only to study anatomy, geometry, geology, physics. Da Vinci tries to understand every detail of the surrounding world in order to transfer it to the picture. Perfectionism may have made Da Vinci great. Perfectionism, of course, prevented him from completing what he started. To date, he is considered the author of only 15 works, not so much for an artist who has lived a long life. The Adoration of the Magi, of course, is not ready on time. The contract is torn up, Leonardo gets into debt. The future genius borrows money, and, judging by the records, he buys paints and a bottle of wine with them. At that time, Da Vinci was in a clear crisis. And although he is considered a talented artist, but his reputation spoils everything, he does not receive orders. His colleague Botticelli is overwhelmed with work, and Leonardo criticizes his technique. Maybe it's envy, who knows? Anyway, today the Adoration of the Magi is hanging in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, and every visitor can see a young man from the side. It is believed that this is a self-portrait of Leonard. Perhaps this is exactly what he looks like in 1482, when he leaves his native Florence and goes to Milan. Da Vinci celebrates his 30th birthday in a new city and in a new capacity. Now he is not an artist, but an architectural engineer capable of designing almost everything, from buildings to military guns. This follows from a letter from Leonardo himself, the ruler of Milan, Ludovic Sforza. In this summary, Da Vinci lists a long list of his engineering skills, and only the 11th point notes, and I can also draw. It's hard to say what influenced such a turn in his career. Perhaps it was the fatigue of painting, where, despite the recognized talent, Leonardo had a string of unfinished works. Perhaps the desire to finally devote more time to science, which Leonardo began to study passionately back in Florence. Or was it a tactical trick? Milan, Venice, Florence, and other Italian cities were separate states at that time. Da Vinci probably knew that there was a militaristic leader from force who was surrounded by opponents. Such a ruler needs a military engineer, not an artist. As a result, for the first few years of his stay in Milan, Da Vinci works as a producer and director. In times without YouTube, Netflix, and TikTok, people also needed something to have fun with, especially if you know. Da Vinci organizes a theatrical performance at the court from force. And you might think that for a talented artist, it's a move down the career ladder, but Leonardo has a different opinion. He thinks over the plot, set design, music, and special effects of people, dragons, and demons flying on the stage. Da Vinci began to engage in theatrical performances in Florence, but will really unfold in Milan. Despite his mythical image of a mysterious genius, Leonardo is actually a man who loves festivals, holidays, bright clothes, and humor. For example, he can catch a lizard, stick a beard and wings on it, put it in a box, and then scare his friends with it. So Leonardo is also a prankster. In addition, he looks great, has an athletic build, can speak, and also sings and plays music well. In short, the organization of theatrical performances is an ideal job for a person with similar characteristics. But the main thing in this case, Leonardo fully uses his engineering skills. And then it's time to dispel another myth. If you are going to go to Rome, you will most likely land at Leonardo da Vinci Airport. There is a huge statue of a genius, bronze 12 meters high. But that's not interesting. Da Vinci holds his model helicopter in his hand. That's what's interesting. There is an opinion that Leonardo was such a genius that he designed many modern technologies 500 years ago, from a tank to a helicopter. And this is not exactly a complete misconception, but it is far from the whole truth. The helicopter project from Da Vinci's diaries is a fact. However, apparently, it is made for one of the performances. This thing can't fly, the design itself doesn't work. This is a project of wings for human flight. It's in Da Vinci's diaries, a fact. As a theatrical effect, it's brilliant. As a real invention, does not work. And this is a typical story for engineering projects from the diaries of a genius. Some of them were created exclusively for performances. The other part was never implemented by Leonardo in practice, only on paper. Okay, there are a couple of exceptions, but more on them later. So Leonardo is a successful producer in Milan. It is here that he will meet a young man named Saleh. He is much younger than Leonardo. Saleh will become an assistant to the master, then a passable artist, but most importantly a partner of Leonardo, with whom he will spend almost 30 years of his life. In his diaries, Da Vinci will leave notes about the clothes he bought for Saleh, and even brief mentions of their quarrels. It was after moving to Milan that Da Vinci began to keep diaries on a regular basis. He will rarely write about his personal life. The main subject of his notes will be art and science. As you remember, Leonard, in fact, did not have a full-fledged education, including a good knowledge of Latin. And most of the scientific works of that time were in this language and not in Da Vinci's usual Italian. But Leonardo is not discouraged. His source of knowledge is observations, experiments, and personal communication. Milan is a much more successful city in this regard. Much more attention was paid to science there than in Florence. A common myth about Da Vinci is the image of a lonely genius of the creator. Yes, one day Leonardo will write in his diary, "Only when you are alone, you completely belong to yourself." However, in reality, it was the kind of loneliness that is known only to its owner, but not to others. Da Vinci will have to have a lot of friends, students, and business connections, because this will largely be the secret of his success. There has always been a place for architects, scientists, engineers, and artists to hang out at the Forza court. Leonardo is a frequent participant of these events, for him and for many other figures of the Renaissance. This kind of mental ping-pong between representatives of different areas of science and art is an important source of knowledge. In the 80s of the 15th century, the Vitruvian Man became a hype topic for discussion. Let's be honest, I'm not the only one who has seen this image many times. But I didn't fully understand what kind of naked dude was inscribed in a square. Let's figure it out now. Marcus Vitruvius was an ancient Roman engineer and architect. He wrote a famous treatise on ancient architecture, and the Renaissance is the revival of the culture of antiquity. For Da Vinci and his comrades, Vitruvius' concept of the relationship between the microcosm of man and the macrocosm of the planet is especially close. Translating into Russian, the human body is a miniature world. In the body, everything is arranged and works according to the same laws as the surrounding space. According to Vitruvius, for example, a well-built person can be used as a model for the design of a building. His treatise describes the exact proportions of that very well-built body. Many of Leonardo's friends begin to draw their own versions of the Vitruvian Man. However, Da Vinci's version is becoming the most famous. First of all, it is better drawn. Secondly, the concept of Vitruvius will be the most important topic of Leonardo's scientific and philosophical research. And thirdly, there is an assumption that this is a self-portrait of Da Vinci. If so, then we can roughly understand what Leonardo looked like at the age of 38. And he probably looked awesome. I didn't have such a physique at 28. At 38, I had no chance at all. Perhaps the reason is the lifestyle of a genius. Leonardo, according to the memoirs of his contemporaries, an athletic man, likes to ride a horse and other physical activity. In addition, Da Vinci is a vegetarian. Judging by the diaries, he treated animals with great warmth. Among the records of purchases, there are only fruits, vegetables, and fish. One of the notes will be like this: "I went to the market, bought apricots and eels. Besides, Leonardo doesn't work much. He understands that the ministry of the muses does not tolerate fuss. Creativity and the work of the mind requires time, not schedule. I don't know who the villain is who said that an artist should be hungry, but Da Vinci clearly wouldn't agree. In his opinion, the artist is supposed to sit in a pleasant room, beautiful clothes, and draw beautiful images. All these benefits become available to Leonardo when he receives an order to make an impressive statue for Ludovic Sforza. 1489th year is about the same time when Da Vinci paints the Vitruvian Man. According to the idea, the statue should depict the father with Sforza on a horse. The father quickly ceases to worry Da Vinci, he concentrates exclusively on the horse. And it wouldn't be Leonardo if he made an ordinary horse, not outstanding, not unique, just a horse executed on time. After all, you can't just take it and not turn on perfectionism. First, Da Vinci goes to the stable. There he studies live horses, their postures, movements, and facial expressions. Then he goes to the dead horses to understand how the animal's anatomy works. Okay, the design is ready, now we need to execute it. The statue should be made of bronze and should be huge, but despite the size, Da Vinci wants to cast it entirely, not in parts. To do this, you just need to invent a new technology. So 5 years pass. The French troops are advancing on Milan, and all the bronze for the statue goes to the manufacture of cannons. The French will capture the city, but not this time, but a little later, and the soldiers will use a giant mock horse to shoot arrows at it. But Leonardo just wanted to make a good statue. Around the same time, Columbus and Vespucci discovered America, printing was developing, and an important scientific discovery was being made. And, of course, Da Vinci is not only engaged in the ill-fated sculpture with a horse. This period is one of the most fruitful in Leonardo's career as a scientist. When asked which of the disciplines Leonardo prefers, he answers yes. Geometry, arithmetic, optics, engineering, mechanics, chemistry, anatomy, and that's not all. Perhaps the main quality that Da Vinci possessed was curiosity. Whether this was due to a lack of education or a natural trait is unknown, but what is known for sure is a huge list of questions that interested Leonardo, from why the sky is blue to the device of the woodpecker's tongue. You didn't hear it. Learning the woodpecker's language is the usual plan for the day, which Leonardo wrote down in his diary. And we will come back to this later. Luck plays a significant role in the formation of a genius. For example, in the middle of the 15th century in Germany, Johann Gutenberg invented printing. And towards the end of the century, one of his students opened a printing house in Venice. For printing, he uses Da Vinci's close Italian, not the ill-fated Latin. So Leonardo has access to a huge number of scientific papers. But, as you know, theory will not bear fruit without practice. Experiments and observations are still a vital method of cognition for Da Vinci. At a time when everyone was asking why, Leonardo was asking why not. Da Vinci is trying to make a perpetual motion machine, studies physics, even formulates something similar to the laws of mechanics. 200 years before Newton does it. As a result, Leonardo comes to the conclusion that a perpetual motion machine is impossible. It's not the tragedy that goes on. Da Vinci is developing several military projects, including a giant 20-meter crossbow or a tank similar to a turtle. According to Leonardo's version, up to 8 people should be located inside. Inventions will remain just a concept. The real passion of the genius was flying machines. First as theatrical props, then as real projects. There are many concepts of flying machines in the diaries, most of which resemble birds. Decades of searching, but Da Vinci will never be able to create a working model. Studying different disciplines, Leonardo quickly understands the need for mathematics. After all, mathematics is the language in which nature writes its laws. And this is the very language with which Da Vinci has everything difficult. The biggest problems with algebra and arithmetic. Already being a 40-year-old man, he can make mistakes in elementary calculations and also has difficulties with roots and other elements of algebra. It's nice to know that you have something in common with Leonardo da Vinci. I also had big problems with square roots at school. Cubic didn't even hear it. Unlike algebra, Da Vinci's geometry is much closer, because he comprehends the world through visual images. Leonardo has been working on various theories in this field for many years, but for mathematicians all these studies are not of interest. Perhaps Da Vinci's main contribution to this science is the illustrations for a book by his friend Luca Pacioli, a famous mathematician of that time. The work is mainly devoted to the most famous mathematical proportion, the golden ratio. The discipline whose influence on Da Vinci's work is difficult to overestimate is anatomy. Leonardo started studying anatomy back in Florence, just to draw people better. But already in Milan, this hobby goes far beyond the artistic necessity. Connections with medical scientists give Leonardo access to research, but more importantly to the bodies of the dead. Da Vinci will be the one who will take the art of anatomical drawing to a new height. His images are correct both from the point of view of science and amazing from the point of view of art. Light, shadow, branded sfumata, all this is executed by a great master. Leonardo will be the first to accurately depict and describe the structure of teeth. So if not for all the other merits, Da Vinci could have taken a worthy place in the history of dentistry. Some of his theories in the field of anatomy could have become scientific discoveries, but they remained ideas on paper. However, the study of anatomy, although it did not enter Da Vinci into the history of science, but it definitely brought us closer to the answer to the question of how to reflect the emotional state of a character through his movement. The famous portraits of the lady with the ermine, the beautiful Ferraniere, the Mona Lisa, they all went down in history, largely for one reason. Through the smallest details of posture and facial expressions, the author conveys the thoughts and inner state of the hero. In order to achieve this, it took not only the skill of the painter acquired over years of practice, but also a decade of studying anatomy. Okay, time for an example. Now, we will briefly look at one picture, and you will understand once and for all what is the greatness of Da Vinci the artist. Even if you draw cucumbers with dashes instead of people. This is the famous lady with the ermine. Perhaps the second most popular portrait of Da Vinci after the Mona Lisa. Leonardo is working on it at about the same time as the horse statue in the painting Mistress of the ruler of Milan, Ludovic Sforza. Using the example of this work, by the way, it is interesting to analyze several important points that Da Vinci discovered in the process of improvement. Once these discoveries helped him create masterpieces. But today they will be useful to anyone who wants to make their Instagram photos a little better. Instagram advice from Leonardo number 1. Too bright light falling on the face makes it ugly. It's much better when the lights are dimmed. The setting sun is an ideal option. Instagram advice from Leonardo number 2. The body and head are slightly rotated, and the angle of rotation of the body and head should be different, so the pose will be as beautiful and natural as possible. In short, Da Vinci realized 500 years ago why passport photos look terrible. A genius? And this is not all the advantages of a lady with an ermine. One of the important details is facial expressions. A slight smile is Da Vinci's calling card. She can be found in many works, including the Mona Lisa. A small detail of facial expressions, which seems to be easier for a genius to portray. However, the layman has no idea how many years Da Vinci spent standing with a scalpel over the faces of the dead, studying every muscle responsible for a smile. Da Vinci's perfectionism can also be seen in the degree of elaboration of the fabric, hair, and coat of the animal. And in order not to waste another hour analyzing this picture, here is one small detail that will prove that we are dealing with a genius. Look at the heroine's little finger. It is darkened because it is in shadow, but the lowest part of the finger is slightly lighter, because the main light source is located on the right and on top, because this color falls on the white ermine wool, because the white wool reflects this color and it falls on the lower part of the little finger, making it lighter. Because Da Vinci spent decades studying the nature of light. Because Da Vinci made himself a genius, at least in painting. During this period, Da Vinci will write several more famous works. But it is the lady with the ermine that centuries later will be called the first modern portrait in history. The first work of painting, where the artist managed to convey the inner feelings of the character. For Leonardo, an undoubted success. And not only because poets begin to dedicate poems to the picture, and contemporaries note the unconditional dignity. The Lady with the Ermine is the first painting order for Da Vinci in 7 years of living in Milan. Leonardo of great 1494th year. The ruler of Milan, Ludovic Sforza, decides to perpetuate his name and create a mausoleum for himself and his family. The place chosen is not the largest, but in its own way the beautiful Milanese church of Santa Maria del Graccia. However, this place will go down in history not because of architecture, but for another reason. It is there, on one of the walls, that Da Vinci will write the Last Supper. Another person is to blame for the huge popularity of this work, Dan Brown, in 2003. He writes the famous book The Da Vinci Code. It is there that the writer, more precisely the characters, discusses the hidden signs on the fresco of the Last Supper, which he wrote. Da Vinci. Exactly. Everyone has seen this mural, many are aware of its mysteries, and few know the details. Well, let's increase the number of the latter. Leonardo receives an order to paint a wall in the church of Santa Maria del Grazia, and chooses a well-known biblical story as a theme. Jesus informs the 12 apostles that one of them is a traitor. The moment of the apostles' reaction to the words of Christ is about to be reproduced by Da Vinci. The work process is public. First of all, the room where the fresco is painted is in fact a dining room for monks. Secondly, anyone can come in from the street and watch the work of a genius. And often visitors find neither one nor the other, neither work nor genius. There are happy days when Leonardo comes early and works late at night. There are bad days. Da Vinci stands in front of the fresco, is silent, sometimes criticizes his work, is silent again. After a couple of hours of self-flagellation, he leaves. There are worse days when Leonardo comes to church around lunch, makes a couple of strokes, puts down the brush and leaves. The procrastination of genius becomes the subject of conversation between the rector of the church and Ludovic and Forza. Da Vinci defends himself. He explains from Forza that the artist works even in those moments when he does not drive a brush. Thoughts and images must be born in the head, and only then can take the form of a picture. Da Vinci also promises to take the abbot and portray him as Judas if he does not finish his denunciations. All this is very funny with Forza, and he decides not to put pressure on Leonardo, at least for a while. In 1497, his wife dies with Forza, his patience runs out, and he forces Da Vinci to sign a strict contract. By that time, work on the mural has been going on for 3 years. Leonardo will need another year to finish, but in the end the expectations will be met. The work will immediately be recognized by contemporaries as a masterpiece. Da Vinci will receive a bonus from Sforza in the form of a small vineyard. Happy ending, right? Not really. After 20 years, the Last Supper begins to fall off the wall. Who is to blame? The mural needs to be painted quickly. A piece of wall is covered with raw plaster, and while it dries, paint is applied to it. One day for this artist. Leonardo, as you understand, did not like fuss. He was used to working with oil paints, and this allowed him to paint a picture for years, applying the slightest touches and making adjustments. All of Da Vinci's previous successes in painting are associated with this approach. Therefore, for the Last Supper, he decided to use an experimental mix. I took the tempera, which usually painted frescoes, mixed it with oil paint, and began to apply it to a dry surface. This, of course, allowed him to work in his leisurely manner, but led to a sad result. Over the past 500 years, the Last Supper has gone through many restorations, none of them very successful. As a result, today in Santa Maria del Grazia, you will see only a dim semblance of what the fresco was immediately after the completion of the work. But this is quite enough to appreciate the scale of Da Vinci's genius. Although, who are we kidding? Taking into account the global situation, a picture on the internet is all that is available to us. Now very briefly about why the Last Supper is a masterpiece. These are characters and compositions. Decades of anatomy classes and impressive experience as a theater producer allowed Da Vinci to accurately reflect the reaction of each apostle to the words of Jesus. Let's take this trinity as an example. Judas has leaned away and is holding a bag of silver coins in his hand. Brushing his hand, he scattered salt. His actions, posture, and facial expressions betray him as a traitor. Peter has a knife in his hand, he is ready to act. Bending down, he says something to John. He, on the contrary, is saddened and calm. He knows he's innocent. It is John who is the key hero of the conspiracy theory on which the plot of the book Da Vinci's Cat is based. Allegedly, this is not John, but Mary Magdalena, who looks very much like a woman. However, the depiction of characters who outwardly did not have pronounced signs of one or another gender is one of the important features of Leonardo's work, starting from the angel in Verrocchio's painting, and ending with a late portrait of the same John. The woman in the fresco is not the only mysterious theory associated with the Last Supper. Enumerating and refuting everything is not enough for an hour, but none of these theories is taken seriously for one simple reason: there are not enough facts. The signs that Da Vinci really encrypted on the fresco are connected with his skill and observation. For example, Jesus sitting in the center is located on a light background. Leonardo noticed that objects placed on a light background seem to be larger than on a dark one. The discussion of the perspective deserves a separate video. As you remember, the image of the depth and three-dimensionality of space is one of the main achievements of Renaissance artists. And the Last Supper is a vivid example. The work on the fresco coincides with an important event in Leonardo's personal life. His own mother, Caterina, is coming to Milan. Leonardo writes about this in his diary. A year later, the mother dies of malaria, and in Da Vinci's notes, there are only a few dry lines about funeral expenses. By the way, he spends less on them than on buying clothes. What does this mean? Perhaps the mother has been offended about the hidden one since childhood. Perhaps she herself did not want a lavish funeral because she was an ordinary peasant. Little or nothing is known about this, as about many other events in Leonardo's life. What is known for sure is about the career impasse in which Leonardo found himself. It seemed that after the success of the Last Supper, the genius's affairs should go uphill, but it was the opposite. By that time, he was comfortably settled in one of the Milan creators. This is his home, his studio, where not only Leonardo himself works, but also his students. In order to maintain the farm, orders are needed. But the only art that at this moment interests the main patron Ludovic from Forza is the art of war. The French are advancing on the city, the same ones who came a few years before. Da Vinci has no orders. In order to somehow make ends meet, he moonlights as an interior designer. Leonardo is almost 50, he is generally a recognized genius, and he paints someone's chambers. But even this Da Vinci does not bring to the end, leaving with a scandal. There was nothing wrong with the genius's self-esteem. In search of a job, he begins to send resumes to potential customers. These letters end in a similar way. There is no better candidate for this job than Leonardo from Florence. In Milan, it was often called that way. In 1499, the French enter the city. Da Vinci does not run, vanity is not his style. He is thinking about staying and establishing ties with the new government. But after a while, he still leaves. At the turn of the new century, he leaves Milan, where he spent 18 years, to return to Florence again. In a city that he knows well, Da Vinci will celebrate his 50th birthday. For some, this age would mean the decline of a career, but for Da Vinci, the next 6 years spent in Florence will be the most productive in life. He will continue his scientific research, and will also start working on several masterpieces, including the Mona Lisa. In Florence, Da Vinci has a star status, and he corresponds to it. An incredibly fashionable middle-aged man, in a pink outfit from a famous tailor, is slowly strolling through the streets of the city. Next to him is an equally fashionable young man in his mid-30s. This is Leonardo and his partner Salai. Judging by Da Vinci's diaries, the main items of his expenses at that time were clothes and books. In Florence, Da Vinci organizes a workshop similar to the one that his teacher Verrocchio had. Leonardo's students do streaming work, like commissioned religious paintings. The master devotes time only to those projects that are interesting to him. In 1503, Leonardo is approached by Francesco del Gioconda, a rich silk merchant. He wants to order a portrait of his wife Lisa, who at that time was 24 years old. Why Da Vinci agrees is a mystery. At the same time, he is passionate about science and does not take orders, even from much more influential gentlemen. Perhaps Da Vinci's father Pierre, who had business ties with the customer, helped. Maybe Leonardo needed the money. Due to the large number of rejections, his bank account was almost empty. Perhaps the reason is the same mysterious smile that Lisa del Gioconda possessed. For a long time, the identity of the woman from Leonardo's painting was questioned. There were a dozen versions, up to the self-portrait of the artist himself, or the image of his mother. All this worked perfectly for the image of the mysterious genius, and only by the mid-noughties were really strong evidence discovered that the Mona Lisa is a portrait of Lisa del Gioconda. However, neither she nor her husband will be able to receive a completed order in a year, 3 or 10. Da Vinci will take him with him first to another city, then to another country. He would work on it for 16 years until his death. Fulfilling individual orders is a good way for an artist to earn money, but having a patron helps to really prove yourself. He offers big projects, does it regularly, and, most importantly, pays generously. For Da Vinci in Milan, such a patron was from Forza. In Florence, Cesare Borgia takes his place. Technically not exactly in Florence, here's the thing. Cesare Borgia would be the perfect character in the Game of Thrones universe. At a time when many rulers were distinguished by cruelty and ruthlessness, Cesare Borgia was perhaps the most cruel and the most merciless. Murder, betrayal, executions, incest and corruption, in a word, a bloody tyrant in power. He captured one city after another and could easily occupy Florence. The famous Niccolo Machiavelli goes to negotiate with the Borgias, who manages to make a deal. There is a version that one of the terms of the contract was Da Vinci. Perhaps Da Vinci's work on the Borgia is a diplomatic gesture, perhaps a personal initiative of a genius. Anyway, Leonardo again gets a chance to prove himself as a military engineer. Da Vinci accompanies Borgia on trips from city to city, advising and offering ideas. However, despite the projects of tanks, giant crossbows, and diving suits, perhaps Da Vinci's main achievement in the field of military affairs will be this piece of paper. In order to create a detailed map of the town of Imola, Leonardo uses his scientific knowledge from various fields and builds a special measuring device that rides through the streets. Subsequently, For many centuries to come, accurate maps will become the most important tool in the conduct of military companies. Will Da Vinci serve the Borgia for 6 months and leave him after another bloody act, during which an acquaintance of Leonard is executed? A logical question arises: why Da Vinci, who repeatedly expressed a negative attitude to the war in his diaries and was a vegetarian, while working for such cruel rulers like Sforza and Borgia? Someone will say it was pragmatism. So, Da Vinci got access to ambitious projects. Freud will say, this is the completion of the father figure. Who is really right, we are unlikely to ever find out. Returning to Florence, Da Vinci undertakes a new engineering project. You know exactly the Italian town of Pisa, the one with the crooked tower. At the beginning of the 16th century, the authorities of Florence want to take control of it, but the attempts fail. Then Leonardo offers an idea. The idea, of course, is ambitious. Da Vinci simply had no others. Pisa stands on the Arno River, and thanks to it has access to the sea, and as a result receives resources. Da Vinci's idea is to change the direction of the river. To do this, you need to dig a giant moat. To dig a giant moat, you need to build a giant apparatus. Is it worth saying that the project failed? I think not. The inability to bring his ambitious ideas to life is perhaps Leonard's main weakness. Having come up with a cool concept, he quickly lost interest in it. In addition, by that time, he had already started working on a new big project that had every chance to become the main one in his life. In 1504th year, perhaps the main art battle in the history of Da Vinci begins: Michelangelo's verses. Both artists are commissioned to paint a wall in the same palace in Florence, literally opposite each other. But what makes this battle really interesting is the context. Da Vinci and Michelangelo are different artists, different generations, and different people. By that time Leonardo was 51 years old, Michelangelo was 28. Da Vinci is a bright, fashionable, sociable man. Michelangelo is an untidy, stooped, reserved young man who, despite this, was already considered a genius and received many orders. Leonardo rarely criticized the work of other artists, but not in this case. In his opinion, Michelangelo's nudes looked like bags of nuts. Too chiseled, no sfumat, plastics, and all that Da Vinci appreciated. Michelangelo did not really argue much. He himself primarily considered himself a sculptor, and used this approach in his work on painting. The theme for Leonardo's fresco was chosen by the Battle of Anghiara, an important event for the Florentines. Leonardo already knew how to push his perfectionism to the limit, and open rivalry with a young star, most likely. Just demolished his tower. He dissects dead horses again, dissects dead people, makes sketches of both in his diaries. Experimenting with paint again, procrastinating again, breaking deadlines again. In the process of working on the fresco, Leonardo's own father dies. Not that their relationship was perfect, but often it was the father who brought his son customers. Leonardo often did not fulfill these orders. Here Da Vinci did not recognize Leonardo as his legitimate child, despite a dozen other children, and did not leave him an inheritance. After the death of his father, Da Vinci continues to work on the Battle of Anghiara. Michelangelo is painting another battle on the opposite wall. A few years later, this versus battle will end strangely. Both artists will abandon their unfinished works, neither of them will survive. This could look like a Michelangelo fresco, so a Da Vinci fresco. Both of these images are only copies performed by other artists who could observe the work of geniuses. As a result, Michelangelo goes to Rome to paint the Sistine Chapel. Leonardo returns to Milan. He once again leaves the project unfinished, despite the strict contract. This means that Da Vinci is unlikely to ever get a big order again. Da Vinci comes to the realization of mortality. Both parents are buried. He has little in common with his brothers and sisters. Their relationship with Salai has never been perfect, primarily because of the complex nature of the latter. During that period, Da Vinci meets Francesco Melzi, who becomes not only his disciple, but also, in fact, his adopted son. Melzi will accompany Leonardo for the rest of his life, become an artist, and eventually receive most of Da Vinci's inheritance. In 1508 year, Leonardo again lives in Milan, and again devotes almost all his time to science. There is a case with a 100-year-old man who is simply dying of old age. Da Vinci can't pass by. In his diary, he sketches in detail the muscles, veins, and a partial portrait of the deceased. With this, a new 5-year period of anatomy classes begins. Or rather, an obsession with anatomy? Just imagine this picture of a 56-year-old genius, most likely in pink clothes, running from one hospital to another, and dissecting corpses. Fortunately, by that point in history, the Church is no longer strongly opposed to such operations, at least in such advanced cities as Milan and Florence. Perhaps it is during this period that Da Vinci will be as close as possible to remaining in history, not only as an artist, but also as a scientist. He is one of the first in history who describes some aspects of the brain structure, realizes that the heart is the center of the circulatory system, and opens new heart valves. Da Vinci is going to turn all this into scientific works. Will he finish what he started? Of course not. Is it any wonder, because a typical page from the diary of a genius looks like this? A detailed sketch of the arm muscles, facial muscles, notes, and at the bottom a portrait of a random dude, who most likely had nothing to do with the above. Leonardo was probably just distracted. Da Vinci is much more interested in concepts. You also remember about the Vitruvian Man, and the theory that everything in our body is arranged in the same way as in the surrounding world. So Leonardo is constantly looking for analogies, compares the movement of blood in arteries with the movement of water in rivers, the arrangement of veins with the roots of trees, the movement of planets with the movement of muscles, and so on. Towards the end of his life, he will realize that he was wrong. Most of these theories and analogies simply don't work, but the failings and the ability to recognize them are an integral part of genius. It is difficult to imagine the process of cognition without hypotheses and theories. But the 16th century was a time when not all ideas elicited enthusiastic responses. Da Vinci's diaries contain heretical thoughts. For example, that the sun does not move, or that the child in the womb is only a part of the mother's body, and therefore cannot possess its soul. However, Leonardo never tried to offend the feelings of believers. He only wanted to answer questions about the universe and about man's place in it. Da Vinci believed in the divine origin of life, but preferred to study the world around him through science and art, rather than through the dogmas of the Church. In 1512, Da Vinci turned 60. There are two contradictory portraits of that period on both Da Vinci at the same age. The first portrait is the work of a student. The second is the hand of Leonardo himself. But the people in these portraits are separated by 20 years. One possible explanation is that the student could embellish the teacher, such a 16th century Photoshop master. In addition, there are stories of people who met Da Vinci at that time, and they recalled that he looked much older than his years. Perhaps he was aging prematurely, and then the self-portrait is much closer to the truth. Although it may also be that in the self-portrait, Da Vinci depicted only an inner sense of himself, and not an actual reflection. A year after his 60th birthday, Da Vinci moves to Rome. Salai, Francesco Melzi, and other students are going with him. Leonardo finds a new patron, takes rare orders, but does not complete them. In the records of that time, he complains about his students who either do a bad job or leave and open their own workshops. From the moment Da Vinci began work on the Gioconda until his death, 16 years will pass. Only a few works are also attributed to this period. For example, John the Baptist. Yes, the first thing that catches your eye is not the branded sfumata, but the index finger. He is found in Da Vinci's paintings regularly. The explanation is simple, thus the character points to the sky, that is, to something divine. At the same time, Leonardo completes the painting of Saint Anna with the Madonna and the Christ child. The work started at the same time as the Mona Lisa. There is an opinion that this masterpiece is no less great, just not so popular. Whether this is true or not is debatable, but it is known for certain that the level of elaboration, that is, the number of layers of this work is not less than that of the Mona Lisa. The number of characters is greater, and their movement is more complicated. Perhaps in this period of time, and the previous Da Vinci created more masterpieces, but there is a problem. Leonardo, like many other artists of that time, did not sign his works. Moreover, in his diaries, he almost never mentioned what he was working on at a certain point in time. In Wikipedia, in articles about this or that masterpiece of genius, you can often find a streamlined formulation of a painting, believed to belong to the brush of Leonardo da Vinci. And behind this short sentence, you can see a huge, unexplored territory for ordinary mortals, called the art market. In the 1900th year, a picture of the savior of the world is found in Britain. The condition is not very good, and the work itself does not seem to be a super masterpiece. The author is considered to be one of Da Vinci's students. In the middle of the century, it sells for $100. Remember this figure. 50 years later, already in the new millennium, the theory is put forward that the author is not a student, but Leonardo himself. Experts gather, complex technical analyses are carried out, and as a result, in the 2013 year of the savior of the world, the authorship of Leonardo da Vinci is already being bought by a Russian billionaire who has earned a fortune in the production of fertilizers. The transaction amount is $127 million. 4 years later, the Saudi prince acquires a job for $450 million. The savior of the world becomes the most expensive work of art ever bought at auction. What is the most important thing in this story? Firstly, the production of fertilizers turns out to be a very profitable business, and secondly, some experts still consider the whole epic with the picture savior of the world to be the main scam in the history of the art market. And here's why. Experts are responsible for determining the authorship of a particular picture, and one of the criteria in their work is attention. The sixth sense of truth, let's take the savior of the world. Some experts look at the painting and note the signature sfumato, the elaboration of the fabric, the hair of a typical Da Vinci. Another part of equally respected experts' objects. Leonardo would hardly have portrayed the hero frontally, he preferred three-quarters. And look at the ball in your hand. Da Vinci, who studied science, could not help but know that the glass ball distorts the object behind it. We should see the hand upside down. The first experts answer this. Dudes, a genius on that genius. He deliberately depicted the hand behind the ball in violation of the law of physics, as he understood that otherwise this detail would distract the viewer's attention. It is not completely known who is right, but it is worth noting that experts who deny the authorship of Da Vinci are still in a strong minority. The picture of the authorship of which there is no doubt is the Mona Lisa. But what raises doubts, according to many internet users, is the degree of Gioconda's masterpiece. You can often find comments on YouTube like it's not such a masterpiece, and if she hadn't been kidnapped, then no one would have known about her. There are a bunch of better pictures. And in general, I don't like this Gioconda. Okay, it's time to give a clear answer. Mona Lisa, of course, is a masterpiece Mona Lisa may not like, and that's fine. Yes, the huge popularity of Gioconda is connected with her abduction at the beginning of the last century. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, then you haven't watched the video on my channel dedicated to the theft of the Mona Lisa. The plot is a canon, a rocket vetoes, a link in the description. Summarizing dozens of world masterpieces were once stolen and returned, can they compete with the Mona Lisa in fame? A rhetorical question. Look at the two paintings, the first Ginevra da Vinci that Leonardo painted back in Florence when he was about 25. Good work of a talented artist. But the Mona Lisa is already a masterpiece of genius. Between these two works, there are decades of studying optics, anatomy, geology, and other disciplines. All the knowledge and experience that Da Vinci acquired over the years, several centuries, have not passed for Gioconda without a trace. Her face most likely lost her eyebrows as a result of one of the restorations. The colors have yellowed and faded because of the experiments of the genius with paints. In the Prado Museum, there is a copy of the Gioconda, probably written by one of the students. Thanks to her, we can roughly imagine what the colors of the Mona Lisa were 500 years ago. By the way, the famous tracking gaze was not invented by Da Vinci. This technique, when a character looks at the viewer from any angle, was used before Leonardo. However, today this effect is associated with the Gioconda. But the most important Mona Lisa is a kind of result of the artist's entire life, dozens of years of research, trial and error. Perhaps that is why Leonardo never gave it to the customer, but constantly supplemented it. For Da Vinci, good enough was always not good enough. In 1515th year, Leonardo accepts the invitation of a new patron. It becomes the King of France, Francis I. Da Vinci leaves Italy for the first time in his life. Cellai stays in Milan. Leonard's new home is a small castle in France. King Francis I is the perfect patron that Da Vinci has been waiting for all his life. Comfortable living conditions, a generous scholarship, and most importantly, no deadlines. Instead, the genius was declared the chief engineer, artist and architect of the king. Leonardo spends the last years in his castle, sometimes receiving guests. Some of them note obvious signs of a stroke and a paralyzed hand of the master. The logical conclusion is that he can't write, but his right hand was paralyzed, and Da Vinci is left-handed. Most likely, he continued to work until the end of his life. One of the latest projects will be the concept of an entire city for King Francis. Da Vinci will not have time to finish the project. Leonardo once wrote in his diary, "As a richly lived day provides a good sleep, so a rich life provides a happy death." He will die in May 1519 and will be buried in the church of the castle of Amboise. In the 19th century, the church will be destroyed, then half a century later, the remains will be dug up there and reburied in another church. Presumably, the remains found belonged to Leonardo da Vinci, but no one knows for sure. This mystery fits perfectly into the history of a man about whom much is really still unknown. But what is known for sure is that Leonardo was a genius. The truth became to me at once and not in everything. Once upon a time, I heard the idea that artists and scientists are actually looking for answers to the same questions. But they do it in different ways: who we are, from where, and what is our place in the universe. And as a rule, these same artists and scientists are different people. But Leonardo combined both, with varying degrees of success. But still, those who are still watching, apparently, are haunted by one question. What the hell is wrong with the tongue of a woodpecker? So the tongue of a woodpecker is 3 times longer than its beak. It is convenient to get insects from the bark of a tree, but there is a problem. Where to store this unit when the beak is closed? And this is already interesting. The tongue of the woodpecker bends, encircles the entire perimeter of the head, and ends in the area of the nostrils. In this way, it works as an airbag for the brain. Thanks to this, the woodpecker strikes the tree with its beak with such force that such an action would simply kill a person. Why Da Vinci needed this information, who knows? And it is clear that because of such hobbies, Leonardo created fewer masterpieces, but the question is different. Would he have created these masterpieces without such hobbies?